The message echoed through every communication channel on Earth, slicing through the static of routine broadcasts and emergency alerts. At first, people thought it was just another hoax, another one of those viral jokes or a badly timed prank. But when the transmission persisted, uninterrupted and with eerie clarity, curiosity turned to confusion, then to alarm. The voice, mechanical yet smooth, was calm, too calm for something that could only be described as a threat. "Congratulations, you've just declared war on the galaxy's most fearsome species." The words felt like a slap in the face. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The room was dead silent, as though the entire world had collectively held its breath. What did that mean? Who would have the audacity to make such a claim? The voice continued, cold and uncaring. "You may not know us, but we've known you. For centuries, your kind has teetered on the edge of something you don't yet understand. But today, you've crossed that line." Across the globe, humanity's leaders scrambled for answers. Governments fell into disarray, while scientists and military personnel tried to make sense of the message. Could it be some sort of advanced alien species, or perhaps an artificial intelligence? Who were the Zorth, and why had they waited until now to make their presence known? The message came through again, as if to answer those questions that weighed on every mind. "We are the Zorth. We are the perfect warriors, the apex of a dying race, engineered to dominate the galaxy. You have no idea the mistake you have just made, but it will be your last. The artifact you've uncovered was ours, a relic of a civilization far older than your own." A moment of static flickered across the transmission, and then a hologram appeared, a shimmering figure, at least 10 feet tall, a cold and emotionless being that resembled a cross between a humanoid and something far more alien. Its skin was a dark, almost metallic shade, and its eyes glowed with a menacing red hue. Its presence alone sent a chill down the spine of everyone who gazed upon it. "We are the Zorth," it said again, its voice carrying a terrifying, unnatural authority. "And you will regret this." The image flickered out, but the words remained, lingering like a shadow in the minds of humanity. The broadcast ended abruptly, leaving nothing but silence. Then, as the first few moments of disbelief wore off, panic began to spread. News stations buzzed with uncertainty. Military leaders debated emergency protocols, unsure if they should be preparing for war or assuming the whole thing was a massive mistake. The worst part, no one could ignore the overwhelming feeling that this wasn't a joke. No, something about the message felt too real, too serious. As the hours ticked by, more transmissions came. This time, they weren't in the form of cryptic words, but warnings. Images of devastated planets, entire cities erased from existence, monuments turned to rubble. The Zoreth's reputation, previously just a rumor in the farthest reaches of space, now seemed all too tangible. Humanity had made an enemy of something far greater, far older, and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The galaxy's most fearsome species had just noticed them, and it was too late to turn back. The galaxy had whispered about the Zoreth for centuries, but those whispers were always accompanied by fear. No one had ever truly seen them, yet their influence was undeniable. Ancient civilizations, long erased from history, had been rumored to have fallen at the hands of the Zoreth. Entire star systems were said to have been wiped clean, leaving behind only the echoes of what had once existed. The Zoreth were not just conquerors. They were an enigma. They were the perfect warriors, genetically engineered to be the ultimate killing machines, with intelligence far beyond what any species could hope to understand. The first recorded encounter with the Zoreth had occurred millennia ago, when an exploratory fleet of a now extinct race had ventured too deep into Zoreth-controlled space. The Zoreth had responded not with communication or diplomacy, but with destruction. The fleet never returned, and all attempts to contact the civilization failed. The Zoreth's power was absolute. They had no need for allies, no desire for negotiation. They simply wiped out what they perceived as a threat. Over time, rumors spread. Some said the Zorath could read minds. Others claimed they had mastered technologies that allowed them to bend the very fabric of reality. But the most terrifying part was that no one knew where they came from. It was as though the Zorath had always been there, lurking in the shadows of the galaxy, manipulating events, guiding the rise and fall of civilizations without ever being seen. It was as though they were both a myth and a reality, an unavoidable force that shaped the history of the stars. For the most part, humanity had remained untouched by the Zorath. The human race had risen from their humble beginnings, expanding across the galaxy, colonizing new worlds, and establishing trade routes with other species. They had made enemies, of course, but none like the Zorath. Humanity had always been proud of their ingenuity, their resilience, and their ability to adapt. They believed, perhaps naively, that their strength lay in their unpredictability. But that confidence was now shattered. Humanity's discovery of the ancient artifact had unknowingly crossed a line. It wasn't just any artifact. It was a relic of the Zorath's ancient civilization, one that had been lost to time. And by taking it, humanity had unknowingly provoked a species that had never before been challenged. The Zorath were not a race that allowed mistakes. They didn't tolerate trespasses, not even the smallest infraction. The first signs of the Zorath's reach were subtle. Communications went silent in the outer sectors of human space. Ships that had gone out on routine patrols never returned. Entire colonies went dark, with no warning, no signs of struggle, just a hollow silence. It wasn't until the Zorath ambassador made their announcement that humanity realized just how far the Zorath's influence had already stretched. The message had been a declaration, and now humanity was trapped. No one knew how they could fight an enemy so elusive, so powerful, and so utterly ruthless. The Zorath weren't just a threat to human existence. They were the ultimate test of humanity's will to survive. Now, with the galaxy holding its breath, every human leader knew that this was not just a mistake that could be brushed aside. Humanity had drawn the attention of the most fearsome species in the universe, and the only way to survive was to find a way to fight back. The day the Zorath ambassador arrived was unlike any other in human history. The sky over Earth's capital was clear, but there was a tension in the air, as if the atmosphere itself knew something was about to shift forever. The world held its breath. For the first time, the whispers of the galaxy's most feared species were no longer distant rumors. They were real. The Zorath ship appeared without warning. It wasn't the size of the vessel that made humanity pause. It was the way it moved. There was no flare of hyperspace, no sudden flash of light. One moment, the sky above was clear. The next, an enormous black craft seemed to materialize from the void, hovering over Earth's capital city, its sleek surface gleaming ominously in the sunlight. No sound accompanied its arrival. It simply descended, defying every known law of physics. The very air seemed to grow heavy around it. The world watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. It was an event that could not have been prepared for, and yet, all over Earth, governments scrambled to react. Fighter jets were scrambled into the air, but they were dwarfed by the sheer scale of the Zorath vessel. Humanity's might was nothing compared to what now stood before them. As the ship slowly lowered, a figure emerged from its belly. A tall, imposing alien, unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The Zorath ambassador was a being of cold, intimidating presence. Standing over 10 feet tall, its body was a gleaming metallic black, its features sharp and angular, with eyes that burned a terrifying red. Its skin seemed to shimmer, as though it were made of something otherworldly, part organic, part mechanical. It stood in stark contrast to the peaceful serenity of Earth below, its every movement exuding an aura of power and calculation. The ambassador descended from the ship, its heavy footsteps leaving no trace on the ground. As though it defied gravity, it moved with purpose, unhurried, and confident toward the gathering of human leaders who had been summoned to meet it. The crowd watched, awe-stricken, as the figure approached, its gaze sweeping across the assembled diplomats and military commanders. Without a word, the ambassador raised a hand, and the earth beneath it trembled slightly. A soft hum filled the air, and a holographic screen flickered to life in front of it. The screen displayed a complex set of symbols that none of the humans could decipher, followed by a simple message: "Humanity's transgression has been noted." The ambassador's voice, when it came, was calm, almost too calm, carrying a chilling weight of finality. "I speak for the Zoreth, the most advanced and fearsome species the galaxy has ever known. We are not here to negotiate. You have made a grave mistake. The artifact you have uncovered belongs to us, and by taking it, you have declared war on our people." The human leaders, shaken by the creature's sheer presence, exchanged nervous glances. The words felt like an omen, each syllable heavy with the weight of their impending doom. Despite the ambassador's calm tone, there was no mistaking the threat in its words. "You have no idea what you are dealing with. Your species is young, fragile, and insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. We have seen worlds rise and fall, civilizations extinguished in the blink of an eye. And now, you are next." A cold silence followed, the weight of the ambassador's words sinking in. For all their technological advancements and achievements, humanity had just been made painfully aware that they were nothing in the eyes of the Zoreth. They were insects, insignificant in a galaxy teeming with ancient, powerful forces. Yet there was something else, something buried beneath the ambassador's words, a hint of disdain. The silence stretched on until the ambassador spoke once more. "This is your final warning. Return the artifact. Cease all efforts to trespass into Zoreth territory, or prepare for the consequences." And with that, the hologram flickered out, and the Zoreth ambassador turned, returning to its ship without a glance back. The ship lifted, disappearing into the skies as silently as it had arrived, leaving behind nothing but a heavy sense of dread and the faint hum of its presence. The human leaders stood frozen, struggling to process what had just occurred. This wasn't a diplomatic crisis. It was something far more dangerous. The war had already begun, and humanity had no idea how to survive it. In the hours following the Zoreth ambassador's departure, Earth's leaders convened in a hastily organized summit. The world's eyes were on them, and the pressure was unbearable. This was not a simple political issue. This was a fight for survival. The message was clear. The Zoreth were not bluffing. They had declared war, and humanity had no choice but to respond. General Elise Carrington, a woman known for her keen strategic mind and no-nonsense approach, had been called in to lead the military response. She had already gained a reputation for her quick thinking during previous conflicts, but this was different. This wasn't just another border skirmish or political dispute. This was an existential threat to everything humanity had built. The Zoreth weren't just another alien race. They were an overwhelming force, a species that had decimated entire civilizations without hesitation. And now, they were focused on Earth. Carrington stood at the head of the conference table, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Around her, leaders from every continent, military officials, and advisors all waited for her to speak. The room was filled with tension, each person aware that their decisions in this moment could mean the difference between life and death for billions. "I won't sugarcoat it," Carrington began, her voice cutting through the murmurs of uncertainty. "The Zoreth are far beyond anything we've faced before, but we are not without strength. We have our minds, our will to survive, and our unpredictability. That's what sets us apart." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle. The room fell into a heavy silence, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of the universe rested on her shoulders. "The Zoreth have been watching us for centuries. They know our every move, but they don't understand us. We're not like the species they've crushed in the past. We're resourceful, adaptable, and we're not afraid to fight." A few of the military advisors exchanged doubtful looks. The Zoreth's superiority was undeniable. Vast fleets, unmatched weaponry, and technologies humanity could barely comprehend. How could they stand a chance? Carrington knew these doubts existed, but she couldn't afford to show hesitation. Not now. We won't beat them by fighting the way they fight, she continued, her voice steady but fierce. We have to think outside the box. We have to use their arrogance against them. She tapped a holographic screen in front of her, bringing up a star map of the region where the Zorath had first appeared. It was vast and uncharted territory, far from Earth's established trade routes. Yet there was something in the data that caught her attention, something the Zorath hadn't anticipated. The Zorath rely on perfect order, precision, and control, Carrington explained. Their greatest weakness is their overconfidence. They think they can predict everything we do, but they haven't seen the full range of human ingenuity. We're going to use that against them. She turned toward the global leaders. We need to prepare for a new kind of war. One where technology is important, but our greatest weapon will be our unpredictability. We will strike when they least expect it, hit them where they are weakest, and confuse them at every turn. A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Carrington's words had sparked a flame of hope in their hearts, hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as powerless as they had feared. But the reality of the situation was still overwhelming. The Zorath were unmatched in almost every way, and their mere presence cast a shadow over Earth's future. However, in the faces of those gathered, Carrington saw something she hadn't expected: resolve. Humanity had been backed into a corner, but there was one thing that could not be taken from them: their will to survive. This won't be easy, Carrington said, her voice resolute. We'll have to make sacrifices, and we'll have to outthink them at every turn. But we have one thing the Zorath don't. We fight for our future, for our families, for everything we've built. And that is something they can never take from us. She looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. The Zorath think we're nothing. Let's show them how wrong they are. And with that, the human resistance was born. The first encounter with the Zorath was nothing short of catastrophic. Humanity had no illusions about their chances, but they had a plan, a risky, audacious plan. General Carrington's strategy was simple in theory: use their unpredictability to their advantage, strike fast, hit hard, and retreat before the Zorath could mount a counterattack. It was the only chance humanity had to stand their ground. The Zorath had arrived in force, their massive fleet stationed just beyond the asteroid belt. It was an impressive sight: countless ships, sleek and terrifying, each one brimming with technology humanity could barely comprehend. The scale of their power was overwhelming. Yet Carrington had a few tricks up her sleeve. The Zorath's arrogance, their belief that they were invincible, was their biggest flaw. They thought they had already won. In the dead of night, just as the Zorath began their descent into Earth's atmosphere, human forces launched a series of decoy ships, old, outdated freighters that had been retrofitted with basic weapons and designed to look like military vessels. These decoys were scattered across the space near the Zorath fleet, designed to confuse and divide their forces. The plan was risky, but Carrington had calculated that the Zorath's overconfidence would cause them to underestimate humanity's ability to deceive. The moment the Zorath engaged with the decoys, human forces sprang into action. Thousands of fighter jets, cutting edge, faster than anything the Zorath had likely encountered, launched from Earth's atmosphere. They moved in quick, unpredictable patterns, firing bursts of high-powered lasers and plasma rounds designed to destabilize the Zorath's shields. The human ships weren't a match for the Zorath's firepower, but they didn't need to be. They only had to survive long enough to disrupt the Zorath's control. The Zorath, as predicted, were caught off guard. Their fleet, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with brute force, was now in disarray. Human ships darted in and out of the battle, avoiding the heavy fire with their smaller, more agile frames. The Zorath retaliated, but it was no longer the flawless execution of a dominant force. It was a clumsy, disoriented response. The battle became chaotic, and in that chaos, humanity found an edge. The human fleet had been given a small window of opportunity, and they used it to devastating effect. Carrington had anticipated that the Zoreth would focus most of their fire on Earth's military fleet. What she hadn't expected was that the Zoreth would make such a major miscalculation, underestimating the ability of a small, guerrilla-style force to inflict damage. The Zoreth began to lose their ships, one by one, as human forces executed hit-and-run tactics that caught the Zoreth completely off guard. The fight was intense, and the cost was high. Human ships were destroyed, some of the best pilots lost. But humanity's unpredictability, its willingness to fight against the odds, shone through. General Carrington's gamble had paid off. The Zoreth, for the first time in recorded history, were forced to retreat. As the last of the Zoreth vessels withdrew into the void, a stunned silence fell across Earth's military command centers. The battle had been won, not through strength, but through strategy, speed, and ingenuity. It was a small victory, but one that carried a powerful message. Humanity was not to be underestimated. But even in their moment of triumph, General Carrington knew that this was just the beginning. The Zoreth had only been temporarily pushed back. They would regroup, they would learn, and they would come again. But humanity had sent a message, one that even the Zoreth couldn't ignore. Earth wasn't just another weak species to be wiped out. They had the spirit to fight, and that alone made them a threat. The war had begun in earnest, and humanity had proven that it would not go down without a fight. The victory was short-lived. The Zoreth, as expected, did not take their defeat lightly. General Carrington had anticipated that the Zoreth would regroup and retaliate, but the scale and speed of their response were beyond what anyone had imagined. Earth had struck a blow, but now they would face the consequences of awakening the galaxy's most fearsome species. Within days, the Zoreth returned. Their fleet arrived in full force, a tide of darkness that blotted out the stars. The ships were larger, more advanced, and infinitely more terrifying than the ones humanity had faced before. The Zoreth had learned from their previous encounter, and now they were prepared. The battle was no longer about brute strength, but about total domination. The first wave of the Zoreth's retaliation came without warning. A series of massive energy beams rained down on Earth, striking with devastating precision. Entire cities were wiped from the map in an instant, their towering skyscrapers reduced to rubble. The world's communication systems were shattered in a matter of moments, leaving humanity unable to coordinate or call for help. The Zoreth had the technology to disable every form of human defense before the first shot had even been fired. General Carrington stood in the command center, watching as the screens flickered with the images of destruction. It was a nightmare come to life. The force of the Zoreth's attack was incomprehensible, as though they were punishing humanity for daring to resist. The heat from the energy beams scorched the Earth, and the shockwaves were felt across the globe. It was the kind of devastation that could end entire civilizations, and it was happening to them. But Carrington was not one to show fear. She had seen loss before, and this would not be the end of them. There was too much at stake, and humanity's survival depended on their ability to adapt, to fight, and to learn from their mistakes. The Zoreth had struck hard, but they hadn't crushed the human spirit. That was something they could never take. "This is far from over," she muttered, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. She turned to her officers, determination in her eyes. "We can't give up now. We've survived one attack. We can survive more." The human forces were thrown into disarray, but Carrington wasted no time in rallying her troops. It wasn't just the military they needed to rely on anymore. Every scientist, every engineer, every civilian with the will to fight had to be mobilized. The Zoreth had unleashed their wrath, but humanity was far from broken. They would regroup, adapt, and prepare for the next phase of the war. Carrington knew the Zoreth were not finished with them yet. This retaliation was only the beginning. The Zoreth would come again, and each wave of their assault would be stronger, more merciless than the last. But she had a plan, a new strategy that would take the Zoreth by surprise. It wasn't enough to play defense anymore. Humanity would have to strike first, find a way to infiltrate the heart of the Zoreth's power and cripple them before they could deliver the killing blow. There were whispers of a secret Zoreth weapon, one that could turn the tide of the war in their favor. No one knew if it was real, but the risk of doing nothing outweighed the chance of failure. It was time to take the fight to the Zoreth, to show them that humanity would never bow down, never submit. The Zoreth may have struck the first blow, but General Carrington knew that the war was far from over. The true battle had just begun. The destruction the Zoreth had wrought was unimaginable, but it did not break humanity's will. General Carrington's command center was now a hub of frantic activity. Earth's remaining military forces were being rebuilt, and the entire world was rallying behind the desperate hope that they could do what had never been done before, defeat the Zoreth. But with each passing day, it became clearer. Humanity could not win this war with sheer strength alone. Carrington stood at the front of the room, her face hardened by the weight of the losses. The images of the cities destroyed, of millions of lives lost, were burned into her mind. Yet there was no time to mourn. Not yet. She turned to the assembled officers and strategists, her voice unwavering. "We can't fight them with brute force," she said. "We need to outthink them. We need to hit them where it hurts the most, their control. They rely on a central command system, a nexus of information that coordinates every ship, every soldier. If we can find that nexus, we can take it out. And if we do that, we might stand a chance." The room went silent. The plan was risky, insane, even. Infiltrating the heart of the Zoreth's power, deep within their territory, was nothing short of a suicide mission. No human ship had ever breached the core of Zoreth space and survived to tell the tale. Yet, as Carrington looked around the room, she saw something she had never seen before, a quiet resolve in the eyes of those gathered. "I'll lead the mission," Carrington continued, her voice steady. "If we fail, humanity falls. But if we succeed, we cripple them. It's the only option left." The decision was made. There would be no more waiting, no more hesitation. Earth's best pilots, scientists, and engineers were gathered to execute a daring plan, one that required them to infiltrate the very heart of the Zoreth's power and destroy their central command. It would require a small fleet of stealth ships, fitted with the latest technology, capable of evading detection long enough to reach their target. The ships were nothing compared to the Zoreth's enormous, terrifying fleet. They were small, unassuming, and poorly armed. Their only advantage was the element of surprise and their ability to move undetected. It was a gamble, and Carrington knew that the odds were astronomically against them, but it was the only gamble they had left. The night before the mission, Carrington stood alone on the observation deck of the command center, gazing out into the vast emptiness of space. The stars seemed so far away, and the thought of the impending mission filled her with both dread and determination. She was about to lead humanity into the unknown, into the very jaws of the beast. Her mind raced, processing the hundreds of variables that could go wrong. A miscalculation, a single mistake, and they would all be dead. Yet Carrington had long ago accepted the risks. She had seen death in countless forms, on battlefields, and in the eyes of those who had sacrificed everything for the greater good. But this mission wasn't just about her. It was about the survival of the human race. "You ready for this?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Harris, one of the pilots who would be leading the fleet into Zoreth space. Carrington turned and smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. "We don't have much of a choice." Harris nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Then let's make it count." The next day, humanity's best hope slipped into the cold void of space, their stealth ships barely a whisper against the cosmic expanse. They were headed straight into the heart of Zoreth-controlled space, where the smallest misstep would mean immediate annihilation. Their mission was simple: find the Zoreth's central command and destroy it, no matter the cost. As they neared their target, a sense of inevitability settled over the crew. This was it, the most dangerous, most desperate mission humanity had ever undertaken. But there was a flicker of hope within them all. If they could pull it off, they would change the course of history. They would show the Zoreth that humanity was not to be underestimated. And perhaps, just perhaps, they would survive. The journey into Zoreth space was silent, save for the hum of the engines and the steady breath of the crew. Every pilot, every technician, every soldier aboard those stealth ships knew what they were up against. They were not expected to return. General Carrington had made it clear from the start. This was a one-way mission. The only chance humanity had at survival was if they succeeded in destroying the Zoreth's central command. As they approached the heart of Zoreth space, the sheer scale of their enemy's operations became apparent. The stars ahead were dotted with massive ships, fleets that stretched farther than the human eye could see. The Zoreth stronghold lay within the gravitational pull of a neutron star, a strategic location that made it nearly impossible to attack. It was a place where no human ship had ever dared venture, let alone succeed. Status report. Carrington's voice crackled over the communication system. "We're in position," Lieutenant Harris replied, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of anxiety. "We're inside their outer perimeter. No sign of detection yet." Carrington nodded, her gaze fixed on the holographic display in front of her. The path they had taken was calculated to avoid the Zoreth's vast surveillance network, but it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. They would need to act quickly. The mission was simple in theory: slip through the outer defenses, penetrate the heart of the Zoreth stronghold, and destroy the central command node. The problem was that it wasn't just about getting to the target. The Zoreth's defenses were unmatched, their technology leagues ahead of humanity's. If they were detected, the fleet would be annihilated before they even had a chance to engage. Carrington's fingers drummed nervously on the console. Every second felt like an eternity as they inched closer to their objective. The final stretch was coming up. The most dangerous part of the entire mission. It was now or never. Without warning, an alarm blared across the ship. "Alert! Zoreth ship incoming," one of the officers shouted. "We've been detected." Carrington's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't falter. "All ships, evasive maneuvers. Prepare to engage." The Zoreth ship, a colossal vessel bristling with weapons, was bearing down on them. Its sleek, deadly design was a stark reminder of the enemy they were up against. Carrington's mind raced. Their stealth technology had kept them hidden until now, but there was no escaping the Zoreth's vast sensor network forever. This was it, the moment where everything would either fall into place or crumble. "We can't outrun them," Harris said, his voice tight. "We need to fight back." Carrington's eyes narrowed. "Negative. We've come too far to let it end here. We fight our way through to the command center. No turning back." With that, she gave the order to launch everything they had. Missiles streaked across the sky, striking the Zoreth ship's outer defenses. Human fighters darted in and out, using every trick in the book to avoid the Zoreth's devastating return fire. It was chaos, pure and simple, an all-out battle for survival. The Zoreth retaliated with terrifying precision. Their energy blasts lit up the dark void of space, striking ships in blinding flashes. Several of the stealth ships were destroyed in moments, their fiery remnants spiraling into oblivion. But Carrington's fleet pressed on, undeterred, driven by the belief that they had no other choice. They had come too far to fail. "Target the command center," Carrington ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. "We're going in." As the fleet barreled toward the Zoreth's central stronghold, the remaining human ships concentrated their fire on the most vulnerable points of the enemy fleet. Every shot, every maneuver was calculated for maximum impact. It wasn't about fighting fair. It was about doing whatever it took to win. The central command station loomed ahead, an enormous structure surrounded by dozens of smaller vessels. It was the heart of the Zoreth's entire operation, and it was guarded by the most formidable defense system humanity had ever seen. But as the remaining ships advanced, Carrington knew they had to destroy it. The fate of Earth depended on it. With a final burst of energy, Carrington's flagship fired the last missile, a specially designed warhead capable of piercing the Zoreth's impenetrable shields. The missile shot forward, striking the central core with a blinding explosion.